I'm James Reynolds in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. The US announces another military aid package for Ukraine worth $400 million. It comes as President Biden meets the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz for talks here in Washington in what's been described as a quiet working visit. Alec Murdaugh, the disgraced South Carolina lawyer, is sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife and son.
I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Those sentences will run consecutive.
The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog visits Iran after his inspectors find uranium particles enriched to near weapons-grade level. And Sydney is awash with rainbows as the 17-day World Pride Festival is underway. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. We begin the program right here in the US, where President Biden has been hosting the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in what's been described as a quiet working visit. High on their agenda, the war in Ukraine, amid concerns that China may soon start providing weapons to Russia. Ahead of the meeting, the Pentagon announced details of the third US military aid package for Ukraine worth $400 million. It includes ammunition and equipment, but not the F-16 fighter jets that Kiev has been requesting. Let's take a listen to a bit of what President Biden and Chancellor Scholz have had to say. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is at the White House. Sarah, it was described as a quiet working visit. I must admit, the men spoke so quietly in the Oval Office I could barely make out what they were saying. But how big a commitment is what was announced from President Biden? Sarah Smith at the White House, many thanks. Well, one more bit of news about President Biden. Mr. Biden's doctor has confirmed that the president had a cancerous skin lesion removed from his chest as part of a routine health check. The statement said that the lesion was cancerous, but that the affected tissue had been safely removed. According to the American Academy of Dermatology, the president's type of skin cancer is the most common kind of cancer in the world. More than 3.6 million Americans are diagnosed with it every year. Well, to the war in Ukraine now that Sarah has just been talking about, where Russian mercenaries say they now surround most of Bakhmut, the east Ukrainian city that's been the focus of extensive fighting in recent weeks. The head of the Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has said that there was now only one route out of the city. And the Russian military, mercenary group called on Ukraine's president to withdraw his troops. Ukraine has acknowledged that its troops in Bakhmut are under severe pressure and may have to pull out. Casualties on both sides have been severe. Well, as you can see in this map as we zoom in, Bakhmut is a fairly small town set in farmland. Almost no one had heard of it just about 6 months ago. Before the invasion, it had a population of around 73,000 people. Well, meanwhile, Kiev has ordered some residents in the northeastern city of Kupiansk to leave as Russia seeks to retake the city it left last year. Kharkiv's regional authorities said families with children and people who had limited mobility must leave due to constant shelling by Russian forces. Russia seized Kupiansk early in its full-scale invasion, but Ukraine recaptured it last September. Well, joining me for more now is Evelyn Farkas, who formerly served as US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine. She's now the Executive Director of the McCain Institute. Thanks so much for joining us, Evelyn Farkas. Almost every day when I start looking at the Ukraine conflict, I look at the front lines, and it seems that the maps for some time have stayed reasonably static. We are seeing some of these movements in Bakhmut, but where do you see things? Evelyn Farkas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, turning now to Ukraine's northern neighbor, Belarus, a Russian ally, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ales Bialiatski, has been sentenced to 10 years in prison. Mr. Bialiatski, one of 3 winners of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize, seen here, is the founder of a human rights group which helped protesters during a wave of unrest in Belarus in 2020. He was charged with smuggling money into Belarus and financing protests. Mr. Bialiatski denies that. His supporters say that the authoritarian regime of the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, a close ally of President Putin, is trying to silence him. Now, to the case that has gripped America. Alec Murdaugh, a prominent South Carolina lawyer, has been given 2 terms in prison, 2 life terms, for the murders of his wife and son on their hunting estate in 2021. Prior to the sentence being announced, the 54-year-old again denied the murders of his son Paul and his wife Maggie. Gary O'Donoghue, thanks so much. In other news now, thousands of university students took to the streets of Athens to demand justice for the victims who died in Tuesday's train crash. At least 57 people, mostly university students, were confirmed dead after two trains collided whilst moving towards each other on the same train track. Rail workers across the country held a one-day strike on Thursday, blaming the government for negligence, including underinvestment. Scientists from the UK and Australia have discovered a new disease in wild birds caused solely by plastic pollution. The disease is called plasticosis. It's caused, as you might imagine, by small pieces of plastic inflaming the bird's digestive tracts, making the birds vulnerable to infection and causing them to struggle to digest food. Global plastic production has doubled in the last 20 years. We turn next to Iran, where Rafael Grossi, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, is meeting the country's top leaders. It comes after Grossi's UN body, the International Atomic Energy Agency, issued a report saying that uranium particles enriched to near weapons-grade levels had been found inside Iran. All the while, Tehran continues to insist that its nuclear program is being used exclusively for peaceful purposes. For more, I've been speaking to Behnam Bentaloglu, an Iran expert at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We turn next to China, where the National People's Congress, essentially the parliament but without that much power, begins this weekend. China's leaders are expected to unveil the biggest government reshuffle in more than a decade. It comes as the country is trying to confront a host of issues at home and abroad. The BBC's Stephen McDonnell is in Beijing. Stephen McDonnell reporting. To Australia now, and the world's biggest LGBTQ festival, Sydney World Pride. Its finale comes on Sunday, when an expected 50,000 people will march for equality over Sydney's Harbour Bridge. Phil Mercer reports. Before we go, underwater archaeologists have discovered a medieval shipwreck with a fully stocked pantry of spices, including ginger, clove, saffron and black pepper, and organic remains of fruits and nuts and berries, a good vegan mix. The 15th century ship once belonged to King Hans of Denmark and Norway. It was found by divers off the coast of Sweden. Over 3,097 plant remains were recovered from the algae-covered vessel. The discovery provides a window into the palate of Northern Europe's elite. The sea preserved the organic remains because its low concentration of salt. Thank you so much for watching BBC World News America.
Hello. Storm Juliet is still bringing some wet and windy weather to southern Europe.